Chapter 491. That was a lot more painful than I thought. Leaning by the wall of the room, I heavily gasped for air. Ha. My arms still hurt, but with the aid of the potion that Amanda had given me, I was slowly starting to feel better. That being said, I don't think I can use the fifth movement at its full potential just yet. Injuries aside, it became apparent to me that there was still a small way to go for me before being able to use the fifth movement comfortably. My body could still not withstand the full power of the attack. If I had to make an estimate, then by the time I reached rank I would have no problem executing it. Wait. Raising my head, my eyes lit up. There is actually a way. A way for me to use the fifth movement without breaking my body apart. Ugh. Propping my body up with the aid of my arm, Amanda suddenly called out for me. She had a complicated look on her face as she stared at the scar in the distance. Ring. Yes. Did you do this? Ah. Staring into the distance, I finally noticed the long scar tracing across the wall. Not only that, but I was also able to see Jean. Scratching the back of my head, a wry smile appeared on my face. How are you doing, Jean? Been a while since I've seen you. Let's just pretend that nothing happened. With his back turned against me, Jean continued to trace his finger across the scar on the wall. He then eventually turned his head and met my eyes. How were you able to do this? Well, pursing my lips and feeling everyone's eyes land on me, I knew that there was no point in feigning ignorance. Thus I just came clean. I was just practicing a technique of mine. Didn't think it would end up doing this much damage. Actually, I didn't think I would have even have able to pull the move on the first attempt. Even though it wasn't exactly complete, it was still the fifth movement. Gazing at Amanda from the corner of my eyes and turning my head to look at the scar again, I apologized. Sorry about the scar. If you want me to paw. It's fine. Amanda sighed. Next time choose a more appropriate room. Do you think I actually knew this was going to happen? No way in hell would I have expected the fifth movement to be so strong. Alright. I will do so. Try the lworld.com platform for the most advanced reading experience. Thank you. Amanda softly nodded her head. Then suddenly Amanda's smartwatch vibrated. It was a message. Amanda glanced at her smartwatch, then looked back at the female assistant. Let the other know that the situation is resolved. There is no attack. It was just an incident. Yes. The assistant's back straightened. She quickly rushed out of the room. Staring at the assistant leaving the room, it finally dawned on me. What was Jean doing here? He wasn't the type of person that would go out of his way to meet Amanda unless it was something important. Mind if I ask, but what is Jean doing here? Jean. Amanda glanced at Jean and their eyes met. He gave her a short nod. Pursing her lips, Amanda started to explain. He's here about a possible collaboration. Because of the crack in the sky, we're both currently short on staff. Collaboration. Yes, we're trying to get rid of a supply station. Jean suddenly cut in. You weren't here when this was happening, but recently, a new pill has started to spread throughout the human domain. We've currently found one of its bigger supply stations and we're trying to get rid of it. Oh. Right, there was something about this in my memories. A lot of the future events may have changed, however, there were still some things that didn't change. For example, this event. It was an event that was supposed to happen in the novel. And it was an event where Jean and Amanda would suffer tremendous losses to their forces. Not sure how that worked anymore. Regardless, I decided to say my piece. If you two are talking about the supply station in the Northern District, Morphil Street, then I suggest the two of you not to go. Amanda and Jean looked at each other. If I'm not wrong, then the supply station you two are going to is a trap devised by the other guilds to bring you down. Because the gap between the top two guilds and the other ones was widening, in order to reduce their influence and force, the other diamond-graded guilds decided to resort to dirty tactics in order to reduce their influence. As such, they devised a trap to daemonage a small elite force of both respective guilds. There was a chance of me being wrong with all the events changing, but it was never wrong to be on the safe side. If I'm not wrong, the two of you will probably go with only a couple of rankers and expect to bulldoze your way toward the supply station, right? Upon saying those words, the faces of Amanda and Jean changed. I felt a boost in confidence when I saw this. It really does seem like this is the event. Actually, if you're wondering how valid my words are, even I'm not too sure. However, it's best if you two become more alert during the mission. Who knows, things might truly end up as I said, and the both of you will suffer tremendous losses. I'm sure neither of you would want that. There was a brief moment of silence after I said those words. Breaking the silence, Amanda turned to look at Jean. What do you think? Lifting his head up to glance my way, Jean took a deep breath. How sure are you about this? 50%? Maybe less. Okay. Jean nodded his head. He then turned to look at Amanda. If it's as Rin said, this can also be a good opportunity for the both of us. I agree. Amanda replied in agreement. Placing his hand under his chin, Jean thought of something. Let's secretly bring more rankers with us. If there truly is a trap, we can take this chance to find out who is against us and deal a blow against them. How many rankers can Starlight Guild bring? If we exclude my father and grandfather, I can bring an extra 2. Demon Hunter can also do the same. I'll take my leave now. Seeing that there was nothing else for me to say, I tactfully decided to leave. As much as I wanted to go with them, there were other things I needed to do. Yes. Don't worry about the wall. Amanda bid me goodbye. Jean did the same as he nodded his head and I nodded back before leaving the room. Click. That's on problem sorted. With Amanda and Jean possibly avoiding a terrible scenario, my mind felt at ease. That being said, coming to a halt in the middle of the hall, I realized something. Perhaps not everything has changed. Recently, I had been using my memories of the future less and less. The reason for this was because I no longer trusted them as much and because of all the changes that I did. However, if I looked back at it now, not all had changed. If that's the case, I should use this chance to study my notes of the future once again and get rid of any potential trouble before they come. This was a feasible idea. Rather than just waiting for bad stuff to happen, it was better if I got rid of them before they happened. Putting my mask back on my face, I continued walking. I better get to work. A couple of days passed by in the blink of an eye, and it was now Saturday. This should be the place. Stopping in front of a coffee shop, I entered the place, and a nice aromatic coffee smell invaded my nostrils. Glancing around the place, I soon spotted a familiar figure sitting in the corner of the shop. Been a while, Kevin. Lifting his head up to stare in my direction, Kevin's eyes began to squint as his face darkened. Rin. Yes, that's my name. I sat down comfortably on the chair opposite. Leaning back on the chair, I noticed that there was an iced latte in front of me already. Did Kevin ordered it for me beforehand? How sweet of him. Thanks. Thanking Kevin, I brought the latte to my lips and took a sip. Feeling the refreshing taste of coffee in my mouth, I instantly felt a lot better. New novel and are published here. lworld.com. Nice. Putting the latter down, I looked at Kevin. So, what did you want to talk about? I did find it odd that Kevin wanted to talk to me out of nowhere. At first, I thought it was because he was mad at me due to what I had said at the press conference, but looking at him now, it didn't seem like it. Putting his own cup down, Kevin sighed. Glancing around the place, he waved his hand and erected an invisible sound barrier around us. Seeing his weird behavior, I became slightly alarmed. What exactly was he trying to do? It was then that Kevin started to speak. Rin, I need your help. Pie help? Yes. Kevin's face hardened a little. He seemed unsure about what to say. This aroused my curiosity. Spit it out. What do you need my help with? It's like this. Eventually, Kevin started to recount to me all the details regarding his mission. Since he had already told me all of his secrets, Kevin didn't shy away from telling me the stuff that he wouldn't normally say, like the fact that the mission was from the system and stuff. Regarding the talk, it was about how he had to go to a different planet, to the rewards he would get from completing it, and the fact that he could bring 3 people to the mission. By the time he was done speaking, I had already gotten a good grasp of what the mission entailed too. And so since you already know about my secret, I didn't think twice about telling you. The only problem is that I'm still unsure about the third person. You don't have to worry about that. Taking a sip of the latte, I smiled slightly. I already have an idea on who to bring. You do? Kevin curiously asked. Yeah, I nodded. Given the details of the mission you told me, there is only one possible person that we can bring. Who? Lowering my hand, I stared at Kevin in the most obvious manner. Who else but Jean? Jean. Yeah, in the first place we need someone to reach rank before even considering the mission. If we take that criterion into account and the fact that Jean is very good with stealth, he's the best option we have for our mission. There was also Angelica, however, in this mission she would probably be the worst person to bring along. Since demons could sense demonic energy a lot more easily than mana, if I brought Angelica with me, our location would potentially be exposed. Furthermore, I actually needed Angelica to stay behind because I had something important for her to do. It was then that Kevin started to speak. Rin, I need your help. Pi, help? Yes. Kevin's face hardened a little. He seemed unsure about what to say. This aroused my curiosity. Spit it out. What do you need my help with? It's like this. Eventually, Kevin started to recount to me all the details regarding his mission. Since he had already told me all of his secrets, Kevin didn't shy away from telling me the stuff that he wouldn't normally say, like the fact that the mission was from the system and stuff. Regarding the talk, it was about how he had to go to a different planet, to the rewards he would get from completing it, and the fact that he could bring 3 people to the mission. By the time he was done speaking, I had already gotten a good grasp of what the mission entailed too. And so since you already know about my secret, I didn't think twice about telling you. The only problem is that I'm still unsure about the third person. You don't have to worry about that. Taking a sip of the latte, I smiled slightly. I already have an idea on who to bring. You do? Kevin curiously asked. Yeah, I nodded. Given the details of the mission you told me, there is only one possible person that we can bring. Who? Lowering my hand, I stared at Kevin in the most obvious manner. Who else but Jean? Jean. Yeah, in the first place we need someone to reach rank before even considering the mission. If we take that criterion into account and the fact that Jean is very good with stealth, he's the best option we have for our mission. There was also Angelica, however, in this mission she would probably be the worst person to bring along. Since demons could sense demonic energy a lot more easily than mana, if I brought Angelica with me, our location would potentially be exposed. Furthermore, I actually needed Angelica to stay behind because I had something important for her to do. So she was a no-go, leaving the most likely candidate to be Jean. Considering that you still have a bit of time to break through to rank, it's safe to say that we still have a bit of time before the trip, right? Yes. Okay. Chugging down the latte in my hand, I stood up. If that's the case, I will take my leave now. I need to sort some stuff out. Regarding the trip, count me in. It would serve as a good experience. Sure. Raising my hand, I bid Kevin goodbye. Since there was still time before the trip, it was best for me to get everything that I wanted to get done now. Chapter 492. Clank. A clangorous metallic noise rang out as a large door closed shut behind, and darkness enveloped my vision. Thip, thip, thip. Following this, a series of footsteps echoed throughout the dark place. Hey small snake, does this place bring back memories? It does. Good times, eh? Back then you were still a nobody and look at you now. Still a nobody. Do you seriously have to say it that way? Despite it being dark, I could vividly feel the annoyance in Small Snake's voice. I do. Pausing, I repeated. I really do. That said, Small Snakes wasn't anyone particularly big back in my memories. He was the type of guy that helped from the shadows, so nothing much changed. Puff. Right then, I suddenly heard a familiar puffing sound coming from next to me. Without needing to look, I already knew who the person was. Who else but Leopold? Puff. Been a while since I've been here. Do you have to smoke ever? Him? I suddenly paused. To make sure I didn't hear incorrectly, I turned my head and looked at a dimly lit orange circle that levitated in the air. You've been here before? Yeah. Puff. With another puff, the orange circle brightened for a brief instant and I was able to catch a glimpse of Leopold nodding his head. I've actually come here quite often in the past. In fact, I know someone that works here. Oh. Didn't think Leopold would have connections here. This was a pleasant surprise. It was then that a deep voice suddenly echoed throughout the dark corridor. We're here. Clank. Following this, our vision started to brighten up as another metallic door started to open, revealing a familiar scenery. Wow. Oh wow. So this is the black market. Surprised sounds echoed from beside me as Ryan, Ava and Hein stepped forward to get a better look at the place. They were all wearing white masks and a black hood to hide their appearances, but I could still tell how excited they were. I smiled when I saw just how excited they were. But, calm down for a bit. We're not here to mess around. This was the sad reality of the matter. The black market was filled with all sorts of interesting stuff and devices, but there was a time and place for everything. And now was the time. You guys can mess around after you are done with all the matters I've assigned to you. For now, follow me from behind. Without waiting for them to reply, I proceeded to head deeper into the black market. Along the way, I would spot a couple of very interesting artifacts and objects, but through the sheer power of my will, I was able to stop myself from looking at the items. We have a special artifact that no other stall sells. Buy one get one free. We have the cheapest prices. The loud voices of the stall owners rang throughout the air as a bustling atmosphere enshrouded the place. For more novel, visit lworld.com. Wait up. Snapping me out of my daze was a low shout. Catching up from behind me, I heard Small Snake's labored voice coming to me. Rin, AJ, slow down a little. You're going too fast. All right. I finally paused and looked behind me. With both hands on his knees, Small Snake caught his breath and looked up at me. Where are we going? Raising my head to stare at the others in the distance, I looked back at Small Snake. We're going to Dungeon Seekers to meet an acquaintance. What do you, Maya? You'll know when we'll get there. Seeing that the others had caught up, I continued walking. Compared to the first time I came here, the place looked about the same. However, the atmosphere around me felt different. I couldn't quite explain it, but in the past the black market felt a lot scarier than it was now. Was it perhaps because I was stronger? This was most likely the answer. We're here. Stopping in front of another large door, two tall guards stood in my way. They both emitted a powerful and overbearing pressure. Halt. This area is restricted for VIPs only. Smiling beneath my mask, I handed the guards a card. Here you go. As long as the card did not expire in the time I missed, it should still work. Hopefully. Thankfully, my worries were unfounded. Scanning the card, the guard handed it back to me. I apologize for holding you back. You may enter. He took a step to the side and opened the door for us. Click. Thank you. Without waiting any further, I entered the door. Following me from behind were the others, who looked around curiously. The only one that seemed to be unfazed by the whole ordeal was Leopold, who nonchalantly smoked his cigarette. Walking past the door, I was greeted by bright lights coming from the ceiling of the room. A red carpet blanketed the floor, whilst a young lady wearing a black suit greeted us by the side. Welcome to Dungeon Seekers. Do you have an app? You're here. A rough voice cut the lady off. Appearing in the distance was a male with blonde hair and a lazy look on his face. Just like in the past, his clothes were a mess, and though not clear as he was still far, I could smell a faint scent of alcohol coming off of him. Thomas. I greeted. Thomas greeted with a teasing smile. Oh, so you remember me? Of course. And here I thought you completely forgot about me. I would never. My head turned sideways when I said those words. If I had to be honest, I did in fact forget about him. Not that I did it on purpose, but stuff happened. I am sorry. Thomas clicked his tongue and waved his hand. Whatever, so what are you here for? Actually, we're here to use the dungeons. Dungeons? Thomas paused for a moment. He then smacked his forehead. Right, what else would you be here for? New novel understances are published here. lworld.com. Tilting his body, Thomas proceeded to look behind me. Who did you bring with why? Halfway through his sentence, his smile suddenly froze. Noticing this, my brows started to crease. What happened? What are you doing here, Leopold? Thomas. A look of pleasant surprise flashed across Leopold's face as his eyes met with Thomas's. Putting the cigarette in his mouth away, he smiled broadly. You've gotten promoted, Thomas. Congratulations. What about you? Last time I checked, you were working at a crappy mercenary group. What brings you here? What's going on? I dumbfoundedly looked at Thomas and Leopold. You reek of alcohol. Looks like you still got your drinking problems. Look who's talking. You seem to be an even bigger smoking addict than in the past. Drinking problems? Smoking addict? What kind of conversation were they having? You too. Interrupting their talk, I coughed slightly, instantly drawing their attention toward me. You two know each other? Staring at each other for a good minute, Leopold nodded. You can say so. Leopold and I graduated from the same academy. Leopold hooked his arm around Thomas and stared at me. That aside, how do the two of you know each other? This. Leopold turned his head sideways. I answered for him. He works for me. Works for you. Yeah, for about 3 years now. 2.5. Leopold corrected as he unhooked Thomas's arm from his shoulder. We've been together for about 2.5 years. Yeah, that. Is that so? Crossing his arms together, Thomas glanced in Leopold's way and murmured something. He looks to be in a much better mood than in the past. His voice may have been soft, but I was able to hear it. Looks like he really cared for Leopold in his own way. Snapping me out of my thoughts, Thomas suddenly clapped his hands. All right, that's enough of that. So you're here to enter the dungeons, is that correct? Correct. I nodded my head and glanced toward the others. To be specific, we would like 2 dungeons. 2. Yes. One for me and Angelica and another for Hein, Leopold and Ava. Because of the dungeon limits, we couldn't exactly go into the same dungeon. This was a bit unfortunate, but then again we weren't here to have fun and train. I came here with a goal in mind. Do you already know the 2 dungeons that you want to go to? Yes. For me and Angelica, Silent Cliff, and for Hein, Ava and Leopold, Desolate Mountains. Thomas's brows creased. Then he murmured in a barely audible whisper. Interesting choice of dungeons. You can say that. Visit lworld.com for a better reading experience. The dungeons I had selected weren't exactly special. They were respectively a ranked dungeon and a ranked dungeon. However, those were not the reason why I chose those dungeons. The main reason I chose those dungeons was because of the danger that lay within them. Just like in the past with Everblood, there were demons lurking inside the dungeons. Their goal was simple. It was to create dungeon overloads. And with the mana density increasing, I feared that in the near future, they would become a very common occurrence. No, they will become a common occurrence. Therefore, there are no problems with the dungeons that we've selected, right? I decided to use this chance to get rid of a couple of future troubles whilst at the same time earning the black market's favor. It was a win-win situation. No, there are no problems. I'll go get everything sorted out now. Thomas patted Leopold's shoulder and turned back. I asked Small Snake, who was standing next to me. You already know what to do, right? Yes. I'll bring Ryan to my old job for a bit. I have to sort out a couple of things. With a serious look, Small Snake placed his head on top of Ryan and ruffled his hair. He should help me get my stuff done faster. Hey, stop it. Despite Ryan's complaints, Small Snake continued. Having stayed with each other for so long, it was only natural that their relationship had developed so much. Compared to the past, Small Snake also seemed to be a bit more confident. Not too much, though. I couldn't allow that to happen. A proud Small Snake was not a small snake I wanted to have. Pooey. Just the thought made me want to spit. I've sorted everything, you can go now. It was then that Thomas's voice rang from the distance. That was fast. Taking one last look at Small Snake and Ryan, I urged the others to follow from behind me. All right, let's go. Wheeze. Ugh. Coming out of the portal behind me, I stumbled a couple of steps. I eventually stopped in front of an old tree and supported my body. Fucking portals. No matter how many times I tried to get used to the after effects of portals, I just couldn't. Get over yourself. An impassive voice rang a few meters away from me. It belonged to Angelica. You wouldn't get it. Shaking my head, I let go of the 3 and raised my head to get a better look at the place. Just like the name suggested, we're near a cliff. It wasn't quite apparent at first, however. Once I raised my head and got a better look at my surroundings, I found out that we were currently at the bottom of an extremely steep and vertical cliff that stretched all the way to the ashen-colored sky. If I had to make an estimate, it would be that the cliff was around 100 meters tall. Around us were a multitude of dead trees. Furthermore, I could also hear the sound of raging water coming from nearby. We were likely close to a river. Whew. Inhaling the air, I smelt a putrescent smell like that of rotting flesh. It was anything but pleasant. Ugh. Covering my nose with my fingers, I looked at Angelica. Her face was impassive as always, but if one paid close attention to her nose, they would notice a slight twitch from time to time. Turning around, I secretly smiled. Look at her pretending to not mind the smell. I shook my head. Some people were just too prideful for their own good. Let's get going. The faster we get this done, the faster we get to go back. Chapter 493. It's cold. Coming out from the portal, Ava hugged her body as she started to shiver. What greeted her sight upon coming out from the portal was a vast flat land of white. Upon closer look in the distance she could see 3 majestic peaks reaching out for the sky. That should be where we should be going. Similarly emerging from the portal, Hein curiously looked around. Is it? Swoosh. A cold breeze suddenly blew and Hein's hair and clothes blew back. Aren't you cold? Ava asked as she looked at Hein. He was currently wearing a white short-sleeved shirt that exposed his muscular arms and body. The more she looked at him, the colder Ava felt. Cold. Hein raised his head to glance at his surroundings. A bit. There was a trace of doubt in his voice, leaving Ava dumbfounded. What is he made of? Ava shook her head. She shouldn't be surprised at this point. Everyone in the mercenary group was a weirdo. Herself included. Burp. Not even a second after she came to that conclusion, Leopold came out of the portal. In his right hand was a bottle of whiskey. I'm starting to see how Thomas is addicted to this stuff. Raising the bottle in his hands and taking down a big gulp of the drink, Leopold's cheeks flushed red. Ha! This. Alternating her gaze between Leopold and Hein, Ava's legs started to weaken. Massaging her forehead, Ava took out her flute and blew on it. Toodle-too. The moment her lips touched the flute, the mana around her started to distort as 3 red wolves materialized in front of her. Without further ado, Ava hopped on top of one of the wolves and shouted. Let's get moving, you two. We don't have much time. Following her words, the wolf started to move. Hein and Leopold finally recollected themselves when they saw Ava move into the distance. Wait up. Burp. We're riding wolves? Nice. Click. With a subtle clicking sound, multiple heads wearing white masks dropped on the ground in front of me. That's 15 for me. The masks belonged to a species of monsters known as soul masks. They were essentially a parasitic type of monster that was usually harmless when it wasn't attached to another monster. The key word here was attached. Once they managed to attach themselves to their prey, they would take control of their body and increase their power by a lot, making them an especially fearsome monster to face. Crack. Walking up to one of the masks, I stabbed it right in the middle, resulting in the mask cracking into 2. No core. To my disappointment, I found no core inside of the mask. Another goal in entering the dungeon was actually a core. If I didn't recall incorrectly, Kevin did say that he needed a ranked core which could be bought from the market, however they were extremely expensive. If possible, I would prefer not to spend that much money. That said, finding a core was easier said than done. Despite having killed many monsters in my life, not once have I ever found a core. Bang! It was then that a powerful blast that shook the surroundings rang out. Multiple rocks fell down from beside me and a black deformed creature appeared a couple of meters away from me. Taking a closer look at the creature, I found that it had its chest caved in with white smoke rising out from it. In a flash, Angelica appeared in front of the creature. Extending her hand and digging into the creature's body, Angelica scavenged through the body of the creature before she took out a black orb. For a good minute, I was unable to utter a single word as I stared at the orb in Angelica's hand. Opening my mouth, I closed it and lowered my head. Standing up, I decided to distance myself away from Angelica. There were a lot of things that I wanted to say, but I refrained from doing so. Right as I took a couple of steps to leave, Angelica's figure surfaced in front of me. Then, much to my surprise, she tossed the core toward me. Here. What's this? Coming to a stop, I looked at Angelica in surprise. Was she really giving the core to me? Are you sure you don't want it? I asked, still surprised by the fact that she had given me the core. The core is useless to me. You can keep it. You sure? Somehow I found it hard to believe this. Even for demons, cores were useful. Throwing me an annoyed glance, Angelica impatiently extended her hand. If you don't want it, you can give it back to me. That would be rude of me, Angelica. I quickly put the core away. Since you're being so kind, I must gladly accept your gift. As if I would let go of such a precious gift. Angelica rolled her eyes. Clearly she was unamused by my behavior, but I didn't care. So I just decided to change the conversation. By the way, I've been meaning to ask, how long do you think it will take for you to break through to the next rank, Angelica? How long? Angelica fell into thought. A year or less. That's shorter than I thought. Actually, now that I thought about it, this made sense. especially since Angelica enjoyed a lot of resources that she got from the Inferno raid. Since the dwarves found the stuff from Inferno useless to them, Angelica enjoyed most of the good stuff. Her strength soared since then. It will be faster in the future. Oh. How so? I became intrigued by her words. Angelica getting stronger was good news to me. When the third cataclysm happens. Ah. I waved my hand. Never mind. Shouldn't have asked. No shit, she was going to get stronger then. By then, the mana in the air would start to be converted into demonic energy, resulting in a better environment for demons to thrive in. Shaking my head, I looked upwards towards the edge of the cliff in the very distance. We were currently not even halfway up, and the more we climbed, the harder the journey became with all the monsters coming our way. Fortunately, there was a small rocky road, allowing us to move up more easily. That said, at a certain point of the journey, the road would eventually disappear, leaving us with no choice but to climb all the way up. Let's get going. We still have a long way to reach the top of the cliff. All right. At the same time. Is this the place you used to work at? Yes. Small Snake and Ryan walked into a large secluded building, where a large luxurious garden could be seen the moment they entered the place. The number of hidden cameras and anti-crime magic in this place easily surpassed 3 digits. Welcome to Lost Creepers, please follow me inside. A middle-aged lady with nicely combed hair guided Small Snake and Ryan inside. The insides of the building had an elegant and refined decor which drastically contrasted the dull-looking exterior of the building. Walking through the hallway, Ryan asked, "How long did you work here for, Small Snake?" "About 2 months. 2 months? That little?" "Yeah." Small Snake smiled. However, his smile was filled with bitterness. "During the time I worked here, I barely got any consumers. It was a really tough time. Because his prices were so high relative to some other more well-known brokers, almost no one used his services. He did in fact want to set the price lower, however, that wasn't something he could afford to do since he would have been in debt had he done so. In fact, his prices were already the lowest he could possibly set them. Had he set them lower, he would have made a loss. Given his circumstances, he couldn't afford to be in debt. He was already having a hard time feeding himself. Had he been in debt, he would have probably have had to sell one of his organs. Lowering his head, Small Snake whispered in an almost inaudible whisper. There were hints of gratefulness in his voice. Had it not been for Rin, I'm sure I would have had a very hard time feeding myself. He truly did owe Rin a lot. And this was probably why he never complained about all the problems Rin threw at him. "We're here." At the woman's voice, Small Snake snapped out of his daze. What met his sight was a large and luxurious room. The way it was decorated reminded Small Snake of a royal room with paintings and miniature statues placed around the place. Small Snake and Ryan weren't the only people present in the room, as there were several other people waiting in line, behind a marble counter where a male with squared framed glasses sat. "If you too wish to contact a broker directly, you may wait in line over here," the middle-aged lady explained. With a simple nod, Small Snake thanked the lady. "Thank you very much." "You're welcome." Smiling back, the lady tactfully left. Once the lady left, Ryan tugged Small Snake by the hem of his shirt. "What do we do now? Do we wait in line?" "No." Small Snake shook his head. Taking a step forward, he directly cut the line and headed toward the individual sitting behind the marble counter. "So you're looking for information regarding the Interion Gray?" The man suddenly stopped mid-sentence and raised his head. His eyes paused on the incoming Small Snake. "What are you doing? There is a line you must follow. Please go back before I call a sich. Phone travel on ourworld.com. Here." Small Snake placed a small card on the table. With a confused look, the male with black-framed glasses picked up the card. His face slowly started to change. "Codename Small Snake? That's me." Small Snake nodded his head, smiling beneath his mask. The male stood up and apologized to the person standing opposite him. "Excuse me for a second." He then turned around and rushed toward the back of the room. Ryan looked at Small Snake in confusion. Why is he reacting like that? Small Snake smiled. "You know when I told you that I worked here for 2 months? Yes. Well, that's only partly true. I've actually still continued to work for them. After Small Snake started to work for Rin, and he managed to stabilize his financial situation, he decided to once again work at his old job. This time, however, he had the financial capabilities to operate at a loss, and therefore that was exactly what he did. He operated at a loss in order to display his capabilities to the public and give rise to his name. Recounting this to Ryan, Small Snake raised his head with pride. And so, you can say that I'm a pretty big shot around here. Does Ren know? It was then that Ryan suddenly posed a question. Huh. Small Snake's hands suddenly froze. Scratching his mask, he shook his head. Not really. I started during the 8 months that Ren was missing. By the time he came back we were forced to leave the human domain, and I've never had the chance to tell him. This was actually half a lie. In reality he couldn't quite bring himself to tell Ren. The reason was because he actually didn't know how to tell Ren. The whole reason why he continued to work here again was because he wanted to repay Ren for all the help he had given him in the past. Compared to the other members of the mercenary group, Small Snake knew that he was quite lacking. Simply put, Small Snake didn't want to get left behind by the others who continued to grow at unprecedented speeds. Unlike them, Small Snake was not born talented. He was barely rank at the moment, and he knew that even with the mana density around the world increasing, he stood no chance of catching up with the others. He knew his limitations more than anyone else. And so, instead of feeling down, Small Snake brought it upon himself to increase his influence and connections to better help his mercenary group and friends. I may not be able to help in the front lines, but I will without a doubt help from behind the scenes. Oh. Ryan had a sudden look of understanding. Small Snake, it's nice to finally see you again. It was then that a loud voice echoed throughout the room as a tall male with a robust body walked up to Small Snake with a flattering smile. The noise inside of the room suddenly disappeared as everyone stared at the male who had just entered the room. At the same time, both Ryan and Small Snake turned their heads toward the robust male. Tiptoeing slightly, Ryan asked, "Who's that?" Glancing at Ryan from the corner of his eyes, Small Snake softly replied, "He's the vice head of Lost Creepers." Chapter 494. Spurt. Squeezing my hand, blood spurted out and my clothes became soaked in blood. I frowned when I saw this. Thud. With a low thud, a creature resembling a large overgrown bird dropped dead to the ground. Kicking it with my foot to flip it around, I looked for a core. Yet again there was no core. Seriously, what is up with my luck stat? Was it perhaps broken? I wasn't sure. Cow. Snapping me out of my daze, a series of high-pitched whistling or piping notes echoed through the air, as multiple shadows headed in my direction. Still haven't learned your lesson? Grabbing a handful of red cards from my dimensional space, I channeled my mana into them and threw them in the air. At the same time that happened, I raised my hand and pointed in the direction of where I threw the magic cards. It was at that moment that 3 rings dashed out from behind me and covered the magic cards from all sides. In that split second that the rings enveloped the cards started to ignite, releasing a raging ball of fire. But it was then that something peculiar happened. Right as the fire began to expand, the rings around them slowly started to turn red, and the fire which was quickly expanding came to an abrupt halt. All of this happened in a split second of time, and the result was a compact energy sphere reminiscent of a sun that was slowly starting to get compressed together. It worked. Clenching my fists, I focused my attention on the shadows heading in my direction and directed the rings toward their direction. In one swift movement, the miniature sun appeared before the creatures and I softly murmured, "Ignite." Boom. A thunderous explosion that shook the surroundings echoed throughout the air. A bright light enveloped the sky and the air trembled. The explosion was quick. It lasted for a total of a couple of seconds as the sky soon returned to its normal color, allowing me to see the aftermath of the explosion. Despite the explosion being short, in that brief moment of time it exploded, I could feel just how terrifying the energy it released was. Good enough. From there I was able to see multiple charred creatures weakly levitating in the air. Even though they were not dead, they were still heavily injured. I was satisfied with this. In the first place, magic cards only had the power of a ranked, maybe even ranked spell. I was currently inside of a ranked dungeon, clearly indicating that the creatures I had been fighting were of that level. Had I not thrown a stack of magic cards, I would have never been able to deal that much damage. Looks like it worked. That said, after realizing my weakness in long-ranged attacks, I came up with a new attacking method that enabled me to deal with long-ranged creatures. The technique was simple. Ignite as many magic cards as possible and use elemental discharge from my defensive art ring of vindication to contain the energy inside a small space to then release it all in one go, creating a tremendous explosion. I murmured as I stared at the creatures in the sky. It may not be fully ready yet, but I'm not too far off from developing this new technique. I then glanced at Angelica, who was standing next to me. Angelica, do me a favor and finish them. Okay. Extending her hand, black threads started to form around Angelica. Swiping her hand to the right, the creatures in the air suddenly stopped moving and dropped dead to the ground. Good job. Moving up the narrow rocky road, I placed my hand underneath my chin and mused over my current technique. Just what should I do to increase the power? Clearly, although powerful, it lacked a lot. Especially since it was an expensive move, and the mana expenditure was also high. I should talk to Melissa about reducing the mana expenditure even further. Along the way, we would encounter monsters attacking us from out of nowhere. Thankfully, I had Angelica with me. She dealt with most of the monsters for me. Easily at that. This was understandable though. Since dungeons were small pocket dimensions of the demon world, it was finally with demonic energy. She was like a fish inside of a pond. Stop. Snapping me out of my thoughts, I suddenly felt a hand grab me by the shoulder. Huh. I let out a surprised sound. Angelica's cold voice echoed from behind me. Are you trying to die? Die. Lowering my head, it was then that I realized that I was one step away from falling down the cliff. I swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Thanks. I won't save you next time. Sure. Secretly, I shook my head. You don't really have that choice. I die, you die. Taking a step back, I raised my head and stared up. We're almost there. Near the top of the cliff. Let's not waste any time. Without further ado, I gripped the hard and cold rock in front of me and got myself ready to climb up. Wait. Yet again I was stopped by Angelica. What was it again? Did something happen again? Angelica slightly nodded. Raising her hand, she pointed it down. Look over there. Down. Following the area she was pointing at, I was surprised to find a couple of figures in the distance. My brows furrowed. This is troublesome. Since this was a dungeon owned by the black market, it was made public to anyone who could afford to use it. It wasn't strange that there were other people apart from us. What should we do now? Angelica asked. Her right hand was raised and black threads revolved around it. She was ready to kill. This _ content is taken from lworld.com. Grabbing her hand, I lowered her hand. Not yet. Why? Angelica was clearly unsatisfied with my attitude. Not caring the least bit, I took out a white mask and put it on my face. First off, put your mask back on. The same goes for your hood. I didn't really have to do this since I was already wearing a different mask, but Angelica was a demon, and thus she had to cover herself. She did cast a spell on herself to blur out her appearance from the distance, but that wasn't enough. At least I didn't think it was enough. Fortunately, as this dungeon was under the black market's control, we didn't have to worry about her demonic energy arousing suspicion. Okay. With a wave of her hand, a white mask appeared on Angelica's face. The mask only covered the top half of her face, and the hood covered her horns and body. I did the same. Touching my face to make sure the mask was in place, I once again glanced at the figures in the distance. Turning to Angelica, I reminded. Keep your guard alert. If my guess isn't wrong, they might be directly working under the demon here. Deaths in dungeons weren't uncommon. The cause of death could either be from humans or monsters. Therefore, if something happened to us, the black market wouldn't bring itself to investigate our deaths. If my assumption isn't wrong, the reason they are moving now is because they notice that we're aiming for the top of the cliff where the demon is. Had we not aimed to go for the top, they would have most likely stayed hidden. If we kill them now, we might alert the demon at the top. This was the last thing we wanted since I wanted to catch it off guard. I understand. Coming to an understanding, Angelica lowered her hand and the demonic energy revolving around her stopped. Glancing at the group of people beneath us, she asked, "What should we do now?" I answered after pondering for a bit. "Let's continue going up. If they are really working for the demon, then..." My eyes began to narrow. No longer looking back, I placed my hand on the hard rock and started to climb up the cliff. We'll get rid of them. At the same time, in an even more luxurious-looking room than before, that had a slightly modern touch to it, A robust man with curly orange hair and a mustache that curled at its end, sat behind a large table. The man was none other than the vice leader of Lost Seekers, Sebastian Wolfberg. A major figure that overlooked the entire black market. Sitting opposite Small Snake, Sebastian had an amiable smile on his face, one that left a good impression on anyone that saw him for the first time. Extending his hand, he passed a small teacup in Small Snake's direction. "What brings you here, Small Snake? Haven't seen you in quite a while. There are lots of people requesting your services. Thank you for your offer, but I must kindly refuse." Small Snake calmly answered. Caution flashed across his eyes as he spoke. Small Snake wasn't one to be fooled by appearances. He knew that the man's outer demeanor was just a facade to hide his real thoughts. This was the black market. Everyone here was wearing a mask, both outwardly and inwardly. Taking a small sip of the tea in front of him, Small Snake calmly placed the teacup down and answered. "The reason why I'm here is simple." He paused and smacked his lips. "Poison detection. Null." A small voice rang inside of his head and his face relaxed a little. Raising his hand, he threw a stack of papers on the table. "It's because I would like to make a deal." "A deal?" Sebastian retained the smile on his face. Extending his hand, he dragged the papers his way. "Had it been anyone else, I would have probably dismissed the proposal, but since it's you, I'll have a look. I trust in your capabilities." Licking his finger, Sebastian turned the pages. For a brief moment of time, silence descended on the hall. In the meantime, Small Snake calmly sipped on the tea in his hand. From the corner of his eyes, he was keeping track of the vice leader's facial expression. He was planning his next set of actions depending on the facial expression Sebastian would make. It wasn't long before he started noticing changes. Slowly but surely, the sound of pages being turned at a faster rate began to echo throughout the room. The vice leader's face finally started to change. "This," he murmured softly. Small Snake could feel an audible sense of shock coming from Sebastian's voice, prompting him to make a small smile. One that marked his victory. Got him. Secretly, he unclenched his fists, which were sweating uncontrollably. He may not have shown it outwardly, however, he was secretly sweating buckets. "Hey." Feeling a small tug on the corner of his suit, Small Snake turned his head. What is it, Ryan?" "Stop smiling." Small Snake tilted his head, clearly confused by Ryan's words. "What are you talking about?" Leaning his body closer, Ryan whispered. Small Snake stopped smiling. "You look just like Ren." The hand that was holding the teacup froze. The slight smile on his face quickly wiped. "Better." Ryan leaned back in his chair with a satisfied look. "You can't pull off that look. It makes you look creepy." "Ah." Opening and closing his mouth, Small Snake couldn't find the right words to say. Did he really smile like Ren? "Oh God, it looks like I've been influenced too much by him." His head started to ache. Unfortunately for him, with a loud sound, the vice leader smacked the stack of papers on the table. "Small Snake." His voice deepened. So much so that the room started to shake a bit. With a solemn look, a far cry from his amiable one moments before, the vice leader's eyes locked onto Small Snake. "Tell me more about this deal. I'm interested." Chapter 495. By the time I reached the top of the cliff, I was already starting to feel exhausted. It wasn't because the climb was hard. No, rather, that was the easiest part. The main problem was the constant attacks coming from the monsters in the sky. Pow! Jumping back and twisting my body in the air, my foot landed on a small ring, and I placed my hand on the sheath of the sword. Click. What followed the low clicking sound was black blood that spilled toward the ground like heavy rain. Whilst this was happening, I twisted my body in the air. Hup. Placing my right leg on another ring, I propelled my body to the top of the cliff and I rolled a couple of times. With my back facing the ground, I took a few moments to collect my breath. "I'm tired." Getting up, I walked back and extended my hand toward Angelica, who was still climbing up. "Here." My gesture seemed to have caught Angelica off guard as she paused for a moment. After a while, she took my hand and helped herself up. "Thank you." "No problem." Letting go of Angelica's hand and massaging the back of my neck, I finally got a better view of my surroundings. It was then that I finally spotted it. "Looks like we're in the right place." A large black castle at the very edge of the cliff. Above it was a large beacon that attracted the mana in the air, creating a large vortex, closely resembling a tornado. Seems like some part of the future is still intact. For the castle to be here meant that not all of the future had changed. I was secretly relieved by this as it meant that I could still make some changes to it. That aside, placing my hand over my forehead, I got a better look at the castle in the distance. It looks the same. The castle was almost identical to the castle where I first met Everblood, and it didn't bring me any good memories. Sometimes I wished I had never gone into that dungeon, but I knew that it wasn't something I could have controlled. Leaning a bit, I looked beneath the cliff. Are they still following us? No. Angelica replied, also looking beneath the cliff. Strange. My brows creased. Was I perhaps wrong? Were the people really just some random people who had nothing to do with the matter? It was possible. But I didn't think things were that simple. Angelica, stay on high alert, there's a high chance we're going to get ambushed. Regardless, I wasn't planning on letting my guard down. Yes. Alright, let's get going. I turned to face the castle in the distance. Surrounding it and behind it was a large expanse of dead trees, giving off a desolate and cold feeling. Compared to the bottom of the cliff, the trees were a lot denser and taller, evoking a creepy and ghostly feeling. If I had to make an estimate of how far the castle was, I would say it was about 5 kilometers in the distance. The most up-to-date NOV_scrolls are published under freelworld.com. It wasn't that far. In fact, it was quite close. Even then. Let's approach slowly. There's most likely going to be a lot of traps ahead, so be careful. If there was one thing I understood after looking at the forest, it was that it was the perfect place to create an ambush. Especially the figures below. If my guess wasn't wrong. They had most likely taken a shortcut up and were waiting for me and Angelica. Secretly, I started channeling the mana inside of my body. Let's go. 3 wolves sped into a vast canopy of white, leaving behind a sunken trail of imprints. Where do we need to go? Hein asked as he caught up to Ava. With the speed the wolf was going, added with the fiercely blowing wind, his hair shot back, making him look ridiculous. Staring into the distance, Ava squinted her eyes. We're close. Not even a second after her words faded, she tapped her right hand on the wolf's neck. Stop. The wolf came to a halt and Ava hopped off. Staring into the distance, her face had a tinge of solemnness. Similarly coming to a stop, Hein got off. Is this the place? Yes. Ava replied. Out of precaution, Hein took out his shield, which was still cocooned in a white cloth. Burp, we stopping? With a loud burp, Leopold also got off. Wow. Getting off, he stumbled a couple of steps. Stabilizing his footsteps, he stared at the half-filled bottle in his hands. This is a lot stronger than I thought. He quickly put the bottle away. He was already warmed up enough and it was no longer needed anymore, and he might actually get too drunk to fight. Squinting her eyes, Ava adjusted the beanie in her head. It looks like we can only walk for now. They were currently at the bottom of one of the mountains, and so Ava realized that going up with the wolves was no longer a viable option. Ava raised her flute and blew on it. Toodle-too. A melodious tune rang in the air and the wolves disappeared. Dropping her hand, which was tightly clenching onto the flute, Ava proceeded to head up the mountains. Be careful, you two, we're probably going to encounter a lot of monsters. Finally, Hein murmured, unveiling his shield, which was shining brightly. Burp. With another burp, Leopold wordlessly took out a gun-like device and rested it on his shoulder. This might help me sober up a little. Stop. Extending my hand, I stopped Angelica from moving forward. Squatting down a little, I squinted my eyes. There's something wrong with this place. From the moment we entered the forest, I knew that there was something wrong with the place. If I had a choice, I wouldn't have entered the forest, but since it was the only way that led to the castle, I had no choice but to enter. Anyhow, despite sensing that something was wrong with the place, I couldn't quite explain what was wrong. I had been keeping my guard up the whole time, yet I was unable to realize what was going on. That was until now. Staring at the area in front of me, I extended my hand forward and raised my finger in a particular direction. What are you doing? Angelica asked. Confused by my actions, I answered in a low tone. Just checking something. Closing my eyes and sensing the mana in the air, I stopped my finger at a particular point. Making sure that I wasn't sensing wrongly, I slowly moved my finger down. Look. like the string of a guitar. A plucking sound reverberated throughout the air. It was then that I was finally able to catch a glimpse of an invisible string in the air. Not only one string but in fact a series of them, but I was unfortunately unable to see where they were. As I expected. Pinching my fingers together, I felt a wet sensation. It was probably blood. But I didn't have time to care about that. Placing my hand on the sheath of my sword, I got ready to attack at any moment in time. Angelica, get ready, it looks like we're trapped. Then using my left hand and taking out 3 cards from my bracelet, I threw them in different directions. Left, right, and center. It took about 2 seconds for the cards to ignite, and once they did, I was finally able to catch a glimpse of the area around me. Just like the previous string from before, the area around us was filled with them. Most shocking about this was the fact that Angelica and I didn't notice this at all. Upon closer look, I realized why. Lowering my body, I pinched my fingers. Feeling a hard sensation on the tip of my fingers, I turned my fingers a bit to get a closer look. It's these fuckers. A small spider the size of a nail appeared in between my fingers. In fact, it was probably even smaller than a nail. No wonder they managed to trap us undiscovered. The spider's size made it hard for me to notice them. Our attention was focused elsewhere, resulting in this crappy situation. Rustle. Rustle. A rustling sound arose from the distance and 3 figures showed up. There is someone here. A rough and deep voice echoed out. Following the sound, a bald and tall dark man appeared from behind a couple of trees. Wearing thick metallic armor, his footsteps sunk to the ground. Siphon, it looks like you're right. A lanky man with long hair and green eyes emerged from behind the bald man. He had this vicious smile on his face, one resembling that of a snake targeting its prey. What do we have here? The third person was a female with red hair and a voluptuous body. Licking her lips, I felt her gaze scan me up and down. Full understand on the lworld.com platform. A pity, he murmured. A pity that you're wearing a mask. Sensing her gaze, I felt disgusted. Still, I regained my composure and spoke inside of my head. Angelica, play along. I then fixed my clothes and straightened my back. I'll give you one option. Let us go. At my words, the trio's faces froze. Turning their heads to stare at each other, they soon began to laugh. Ha ha ha. Ha ha, we've got some feisty ones. Interesting. In the midst of their laughs, I heard Angelica's voice inside of my head. Let me kill then. She was mad, wasn't she? I still shook my head. Calm down, Angelica, like I told you, play along. If we kill then now, we're going to alert the demons inside. From where I was standing, I could feel traces of demonic energy coming out of their bodies. They had without a doubt signed a contract with a demon. It was only a hypothesis for now, but since there were 3 people here, in all likelihood, there were 3 count-ranked demons inside of the castle. This was a number I couldn't make light of. Even if Angelica was with me. It was when I realized this that multiple different scenarios started to play inside of my head. Each was drastically different from the other. Taking a step forward, the lanky individual's smile grew more savage. Why would you think we would let you go? Shut up. Raising my head, I activated the one, for a very brief moment. About a couple of seconds. But that was enough. The moment I activated the one, the trio stopped laughing and their faces finally changed. This was especially so for the lanky individual whose book shook uncontrollably. Before they could recollect themselves, I took this opportunity to talk. We know what you're doing here, let us go, we're on the same side. Whilst talking, I tried to keep my voice deep and authoritative. I was trying to leave an impression on them. Naturally, I had reasons for this. Huh. The dark man raised his head and looked me in the eyes. Extreme caution flashed across his face. From the corner of his eyes, he glanced at his teammates. This didn't escape my sight, and I knew exactly what he was planning on doing. He was probably signaling them to get ready to attack. Recomposing himself, he asked, "What do you mean we're on the same side?" "Just like you've heard." Extending my hand in Angelica's direction without any warning, I pulled down her hood, revealing her 2 horns. Once I took her hood down, Angelica's body flinched a little. My actions had definitely caught her off guard. Thankfully, she was still wearing a mask, somewhat masking her expression. Wow. Revealing Angelica's features, the atmosphere once again froze. Smiling slightly, I repeated. As I've said before, we're on the same side.